This is the English service of Radio Algeria International. It's time for the news.
Algeria has expressed deep outrage and strong condemnation following the terrorist attack that targeted Diori Hamani International Airport in Niamey, Niger. Algeria has renewed in Accra, Ghana, its call for explicit international recognition by the United Nations and former colonial powers of the systematic and criminal nature of slavery, colonialism, and other grave violations committed against African peoples and peoples of African descent. Unplanned negotiations between Iran and the United States aimed at building on a newly signed agreement to end the wider Middle East conflict have been postponed sine die, casting immediate doubt over the future of the agreement. Those were the headlines, and now the news in detail from Radio Algeria International. First, in our news, Algeria has expressed deep outrage and strong condemnation following the terrorist attack targeting Diori Hamani International Airport in Niamey, Niger. Algeria reaffirmed its full solidarity with the people and government of Niger in the face of this heinous attack, which seek to undermine the security and stability of the brotherly country. Algeria also reiterated support for Niger's authorities in their efforts and fight against terrorism, as well as its commitment to strengthening bilateral and regional cooperation to confront this threat to peace and security in the entire region. Algeria has renewed in Accra, Ghana, its call for explicit international recognition by the United Nations and former colonial powers of the systematic and criminal nature of slavery, colonialism, and other grave violations committed against African peoples and peoples of African descent. Speaking on behalf of President Abdelmadjid Tebboune at the high-level consultative conference on reparatory justice and historical reparations related to the transatlantic slave trade, the Speaker of the Council of the Nation, Azouz Nasri, expressed Algeria's full support to African historians and international law experts' efforts to gather documentary, testimonial, and legal evidence of crimes committed against African peoples during the eras of slavery and colonial rule. Drawing on its own experience of anti-colonial struggle and national liberation, Algeria expressed its readiness to make available to African and international institutions all historical documents, material evidence, and authenticated testimonies in its possession. Mr. Nasri recalled that Algeria itself was subjected to atrocities including acts of genocide and the use of prohibited chemicals and nuclear weapons during the colonial period. He said this documentation would be placed at the service of Africa's common position in the pursuit of truth, justice, and fairness. The Speaker of the Council of the Nation held the recent United Nations resolution recognizing the transatlantic slave trade as one of the most heinous crimes against humanity, describing it as a significant diplomatic achievement and a major step toward restoring the dignity and rights of millions of African victims. He also highlighted the African Union's decision to extend the theme Justice and Reparations for African people and people of African descent into a decade-long initiative covering 2026 to 30 or 2025. Let's listen to Mr. Nasri.
Algeria, while welcoming this historic UN decision, views it as a practical embodiment of the growing momentum within the African Union, which was also reflected in its historic decision to extend the 2025 theme titled Justice for Africans and People of African Descent through Reparations to 2026. Algeria reaffirms its firm support for all initiatives undertaken by the African Union and its specialized legal bodies aimed at establishing a clear legal approach that includes both colonialism and genocide among the most serious crimes known to human history.
Mr. Nasri also welcomed the African Union's adoption of Algeria's proposal to establish an annual African Day of Remembrance for the victims of the transatlantic slave trade, colonialism, and apartheid to be observed on November 30th. He reaffirmed that demands for reparations by Africans and people of African descent are a legitimate quest for justice, victim rehabilitation, and the correction of historical injustices aimed at building an international system based on equality, dignity, and balanced cooperation.
إن الجزائر تنظر ببالغ الارتياح.
Algeria views with great satisfaction and appreciation the African Union's adoption of the Algerian proposal to dedicate an official African Day to commemorate African martyrs and victims of the Atlantic Ocean slavery, colonialism and apartheid, and to adopt November 30 of each year as a fixed date for commemorating this collective memory. We reaffirm that Africans' demand for reparations reflects the ambition to a project aimed at correcting historical injustices, leading to the establishment of an international system based on solidarity and integrated partnership, and rejecting hegemony and guardianship.
ولا منطقي الهيمنة والوصاية.
In conclusion, Mr. Azouz Nasri noted that Algeria's parliament unanimously adopted a law criminalizing colonialism on April 12, 2026. A coordination meeting was held here in Algiers on the Garage Billet iron ore project chaired by the Minister of State in charge of hydrocarbons, Mohamed Arqab, alongside the Minister of Interior, Said Sayoud, the Minister of Public Works, Abdelkader Jilawi, and the Minister of Mines, Murad Hanifi. The meeting examined progress on the strategic project, which has over 3.5 billion tons of iron ore reserves, focusing on mining operations, transport infrastructure, and industrial processing. Earlier, the Minister of State in charge of hydrocarbons, Mohamed Arqab, and the Minister of Public Works and Basic Infrastructure, Abdelkader Jilawi, along with the Minister of Mines and Mining Industries, Murad Hanifi, co-chaired a coordination meeting to examine progress and accelerate the implementation of the integrated phosphate project in Bled el-Hedba in the province of Tibisa. More details with our colleague Mariam Barshi.
The meeting examined progress at the Bled el-Hedba mine, which contains around 841 million tons of exploitable phosphate reserves, while the Eastern Phosphate Basin holds more than 3 billion tons. The project includes facilities capable of processing 10 million tons of raw phosphate annually, producing about 6 million tons of enriched phosphate. Officials also reviewed preparations for the phosphate processing complex at Wet Kibrit, Sugaharas, which is expected to produce 4 million tons of phosphate fertilizers annually, including DAP, MAP, and NPK fertilizers, as well as urea and strategic intermediate products such as sulfuric acid, phosphoric acid, and ammonia. The meeting assessed progress on supporting infrastructure, notably the 422-kilometer Eastern Mining Railway line linking Ennaba, Sugahalas, Tbissa, and Bled el-Hedba, as well as the expansion of the phosphate export terminal at the port of Ennaba. The ministers stressed that integrating the mine, the chemical processing complex, the railway network, and the Ennaba port facilities is essential to the project's success. They reaffirmed the objective of launching production, marketing, and export of the first phosphate shipments in the first quarter of 2027, while calling for closer coordination and faster implementation to meet deadlines and support Algeria's economic diversification efforts.
To the Middle East situation now. Planned negotiations between Iran and the United States aimed at building on a newly signed framework or agreement to end the wider Middle East conflict have been postponed sine die, casting immediate doubt over the future of the agreement itself. Mariam Barshi has more.
Swiss authorities confirmed that talks originally scheduled to open in Switzerland have been delayed with no new date announced. The discussions were expected to launch a 60-day diplomatic process following an electronic accord signed earlier this week by the Iranian and American presidents. The agreement presented as a roadmap toward de-escalation and a potential settlement on key issues including the nuclear file is now facing growing uncertainty amid political hesitation and logistical setbacks, including the absence of key U.S. and regional participants from preparatory meetings. In Tehran, senior Iranian figures have voiced reservations, stressing that while the deal has been approved at the highest level, it does not signal acceptance of external pressure on core national positions. Despite the diplomatic setback, limited implementation steps have reportedly begun, including adjustments to regional maritime access routes linked to the Strait of Hormuz, a vital global energy corridor. Markets have reacted with volatility, with oil prices rising again after an initial drop following the announcement of the accord. International reactions remain cautious, with calls for both sides to preserve the framework and avoid a return to escalation, while analysts warn the agreement remains highly fragile without a clear diplomatic follow-up process.
The situation, or the security situation in Lebanon, has sharply deteriorated following a new wave of extent or intensive strikes by the Israeli occupation forces across the south and east of the country, raising concerns over the collapse of efforts to sustain a ceasefire linked to recent U.S.-Iran understanding on reducing regional hostilities. Lebanese President Joseph Aoun said the strikes are undermining diplomatic efforts to end the conflict, calling the escalation dangerous and condemning the killing of civilians, including women and children. Lebanon's Ministry of Health reported at least 21 people killed and 39 wounded since yesterday evening, with the heaviest bombardments around Nabatiyeh and other southern towns. Still in the Middle East, the situation in the occupied Palestinian territories and Gaza especially continues to deteriorate amid mounting international concern over rising violence and humanitarian conditions. Mariam Barshi tells us more.
The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres expressed concern over a sharp increase in grave violations against Palestinian children, including the use of explosive weapons in populated areas. A new UN report on children and armed conflict records tens of thousands of serious violations globally in 2025, with the occupied Palestinian territories among the most affected. On the ground, Palestinian sources report continued deadly Israeli strikes in the Gaza Strip. At least 3 people were killed in a joint strike in Gaza City's Al-Rimal district, while others were wounded in separate attacks in Khan Yunis and northern Gaza. Health authorities say more than 73,000 Palestinians have been killed and over 173,000 injured since October 2023. In the West Bank, settlers backed by Israeli occupying forces carried out further incursions in areas near Ramallah, including Deir Dibran, where homes were stormed and roads blocked, restricting civilian movement. Meanwhile, over 60,000 worshippers were able to attend Friday prayers at the Al-Aqsa Mosque in occupied East Jerusalem, despite heavy restrictions imposed by Israeli occupying forces. International reactions continue to grow. The Muslim World League condemned settler attacks on mosques and Palestinian property, calling them violations of international law and a threat to peace. It urged urgent international action and welcomed a joint Arab and Islamic statement backing Palestinian rights. At the United Nations, the United Kingdom representative James Karaoke called for full respect of international law and unhindered humanitarian access to Gaza, warning that restrictions on aid and repeated ceasefire violations are worsening an already catastrophic humanitarian crisis.
And the Israeli occupying forces have carried out a new incursion into the village of Al-Sabah in the southern countryside of Quneitra Governorate in Syria. Local sources cited by the Syrian Arab news agency Sana said that an Israeli military force consisting of 9 troop carriers advanced from the Tel Ahmar base into the area. No arrests or clashes with residents were reported. And Chad's Ministry of Public Health and Prevention has reported 16 cases of cholera, including 1 death in the Karal Health District of Hajar Lamis province. The document, signed by Health Minister Abdelmajid Abdurrahim Mohamed, stated that cases of gastroenteritis were recorded on Tuesday, and laboratory tests confirmed the presence of Vibrio cholera serotype 01 Ogawa. And still in Africa, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, has warned against the building of armed elements from the rapid support forces around Al Ubaid in Sudan's Kordofan region. In a statement, Volker Turk said the international community had already witnessed similar developments and knew the consequences they could lead to, referring to atrocities documented last year in Al Fasher and the Zamzam displacement camp in North Darfur. He stressed that such tragedies must not be allowed to happen again. And according to a new report by the World Meteorological Organization, extreme weather and climate-related events affected at least 13 million people and caused more than 3,000 deaths across Africa in 2025. The report, entitled State of the Climate in Africa 2025, said that climate change is impacting all sectors of the continent's economy and society, contributing to more frequent flooding, rising sea levels, and the continued loss of glaciers, including those on Mount Kilimanjaro. And finally, each 19 June, Algeria remembers one of the most emblematic heroes of its war of national liberation, namely Ahmed Zabana, the first martyr of the revolution executed by guillotine by the French colonial authorities. His name remains associated with sacrifice, courage, and the firm determination of all people fighting for freedom. Mariam Bershi tells us more.
Ahmed Zabana was born on November 1st, 1926 in Mascara, western Algeria. From a young age, he developed a strong sense of national consciousness through the Algerian Muslim Scouts and later joined the nationalist movement. In 1947, he became part of the Special Organization, a clandestine structure preparing armed struggle against French colonial rule. With the outbreak of the November 1954 revolution, he played an active role in organizing resistance in Mascara. He was later captured after an unequal confrontation with French forces at Ghar Boujelida cave and sentenced to death by a military court in a trial widely seen as politically motivated. At dawn on June 19, 1956, he was executed at Barberousse prison in Algiers at the age of 29. Rather than weakening the liberation struggle, his execution strengthened national resistance and turned him into one of the earliest symbols of the Algerian Revolution. Today, Algeria continues to honor his memory through commemorations and cultural events that pass on his legacy to new generations. Ahmed Zabana is remembered not only as the first guillotined martyr of the revolution, but as a man who chose dignity over submission and transformed his sacrifice into a lasting symbol of resistance and hope.
And with this last piece of news, we come to the end of this news bulletin. Time now for our weekly program. We leave you with our colleague Mariam Bershi again with her program Echoes of Time, devoted this time to slavery. As for me, I'll meet you again tomorrow for a fresh edition of our news bulletin. Thank you. To travel back in time and learn about the most prominent events that marked human history, no need for a time machine. Echoes of Time with our colleague Mariam Bershi is your only address. A program broadcast to you every week on Radio Algeria International.
Welcome to Echoes of Time, the program where history speaks and the past meets the present. I'm your host, and today we take a journey across the Atlantic Ocean into one of the darkest and most defining chapters in human history, the transatlantic slave trade. The transatlantic slave trade stands as one of the most brutal and far-reaching systems ever created. For more than 4 centuries, millions of African men, women and children were forcibly taken from their homes and transported across the Atlantic Ocean to the Americas, where they were enslaved and subjected to unimaginable suffering. This was not a random or disorganized process. It was a structured and highly profitable system deeply embedded in the global economy of its time. European expansion, beginning in the late 15th century, laid the foundations for this vast network. Following the voyages of Christopher Columbus, European powers established colonies in the Americas, creating an enormous demand for labor. Initially, indigenous populations were forced into labor. However, due to disease, violence, and exploitation, their numbers declined rapidly. European colonizers then turned increasingly toward Africa. From the 16th century onward, a system known as the triangular trade took shape. European ships departed from ports in countries such as Portugal, Spain, France, and England, carrying manufactured goods. These goods were exchanged along the West African coast for enslaved individuals. African intermediaries, including local rulers and traders, were also involved in the capture and sale of people, often as a result of warfare, raids or political rivalries, while European powers drove the demand and controlled the system. The trade itself relied on complex interactions on the African continent. Once captured, enslaved Africans were forced onto ships bound for the Americas. This journey, known as the Middle Passage, was one of the most horrific aspects of the entire system. Human beings were packed tightly into the holds of ships, chained together with barely any room to move. Conditions were unsanitary, disease spread rapidly, and violence was constant. It is estimated that millions perished during this crossing alone. Upon arrival in the Americas, those who survived were sold in markets and separated from their families, often forever. They were forced to work on plantations, producing sugar, cotton, tobacco and coffee, commodities that would fuel European wealth and global trade. The system of slavery was maintained through violence, coercion, and strict laws that denied enslaved people even the most basic human rights. They were treated not as individuals, but as property. Despite these conditions, enslaved Africans resisted in countless ways. Some revolted, others preserved their cultures, languages, and traditions, and many sought to escape. One of the most significant acts of resistance was the Haitian Revolution, which began in 1791 and led to the creation of the first independent Black Republic in 1804. This event sent shockwaves through the colonial world and demonstrated that the system of slavery could be challenged and overthrown. By the late 18th and early 19th centuries, opposition to the slave trade began to grow. Abolitionist movements emerged particularly in Europe and the Americas, calling for an end to this inhumane system. In 1807, Great Britain passed the Abolition of the Slave Trade Act, making it illegal to participate in the trade. Other countries gradually followed, although illegal trading continued for decades. The complete abolition of slavery itself took even longer. In the United States, slavery was officially abolished in 1865 after the Civil War. In Brazil, it persisted until 1888, making it the last country in the Americas to formally abolish slavery. By the end of the 19th century, the transatlantic slave trade had come to an end, but its consequences did not. The legacy of the transatlantic slave trade continues to shape the modern world. It influenced the demographic, cultural, and economic development of the entire regions and left deep and lasting scars in the form of inequality, racism, and social divisions that persist to this day. Yet, alongside this painful history stands a powerful story of resilience. The descendants of those who endured slavery have preserved their heritage, contributed profoundly to global culture, and continued the fight for justice and equality. The transatlantic slave trade is not only a story of suffering, it is also a reminder of human endurance, resistance, and the ongoing struggle for dignity. Thank you for listening to this episode of Echoes of Time, where the past never truly fades, it echoes.
capital city of Algeria. The city is rich in Algerian tradition and history, with numerous monuments, museums, historical buildings, and other places of interest for tourists to visit. One of the fascinating sites to visit in Algiers is the ancient Kechawa Mosque. Situated in the Kasbah of Algiers, the Kechawa Mosque has a long and interesting history. During the rule of the Ottoman Empire, the Kechawa Mosque was strategically placed at the center of the city, at the point where the roads from the lower Kasbah led out to the 5 gates of the city. This was a district that contained grand family palaces owned by the wealthy and influential political and commercial figures of the Ottoman Regency. During the 16th and 17th centuries, the Ottoman Empire dominated territory in 3 continents, including large areas of southeastern Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Remnants of the Ottoman Empire's influence are still found in architecture throughout these territories. It is believed, but not proven, that a mosque had occupied the site of the Kechawa Mosque since the 14th century. However, the only documentation of the mosque's existence is a notarial document dated in 1612. According to the commemorative inscription, the Kechawa Mosque was rebuilt by Hassan Pasha in the latter part of the 18th century. In 1838, the mosque became the St. Philippe Cathedral, and in 1940, a cross was placed on top of the building under the direction of Marshal Sylvain Vallée of France, the conqueror of the Algerian city of Constantine. In 1962, the cathedral was converted to the Kechawa Mosque. Overlooking a public square, the mosque has twin minarets rising up either side of the 3-arched entranceway. The mosque is of a Byzantine and Moorish design with graceful archways, black and white marble columns, and beautiful decorations throughout. A tomb with the remains of San Geronimo is housed in one of the mosque chambers. The Kechawa Mosque, this mosque turned cathedral turned mosque, bears testimony to the history of Algiers. It also serves as a symbol of the restitution of the Kechawa Mosque to Islam and is seen as having significant religious and cultural importance. Visitors to the Algerian capital of Algiers should include the Kechawa Mosque on their list of interesting places to see.
Sintonizan Radio Argelia Internacional. El diario hablado.
Señoras y señores, muy cordiales saludos a todos. Empezamos pues por la actualidad internacional y nacional. Argelia llama desde Ghana a un reconocimiento internacional explícito del carácter criminal de la esclavitud y del colonialismo. Prosigue el genocidio en Gaza. La ONU reclama medidas urgentes para aliviar el sufrimiento de la población mientras más mártires caen en el Líbano. Las negociaciones previstas entre Estados Unidos e Irán destinadas a concluir un acuerdo para reducir las tensiones en la región han sido aplazadas. Estimados Radio Escuchas, hola de nuevo y bienvenidos a las ondas de Radio Argelia Internacional. Argelia lanzó ayer desde Accra, Ghana, un nuevo y sincero llamamiento para que las organizaciones de la ONU y las antiguas potencias coloniales reconozcan explícitamente el carácter sistemático y criminal de las prácticas relacionadas con la esclavitud y el colonialismo. Durante su intervención en su calidad de representante del presidente de la República, Abdelmajid Tebboune, en la conferencia consultiva de alto nivel sobre justicia restaurativa y reparaciones históricas relacionadas con la trata transatlántica de esclavos, el presidente del Consejo de la Nación, Azouz Nasri, expresó su apoyo a los esfuerzos de historiadores y juristas africanos para recopilar pruebas sobre los crímenes cometidos durante la esclavitud y el colonialismo. Escuchemos su declaración.
Lanzamos hoy un llamamiento renovado y sincero para que se reconozca internacionalmente la naturaleza criminal de las prácticas relacionadas con la esclavitud y el colonialismo, y para que cesen las violaciones de derechos humanos contra los pueblos africanos. Para esclarecer la verdad, Argelia apoya la acción conjunta y integral, basada en esfuerzos concretados y enfoques unificados, mediante la recopilación de documentos, testimonios y decisiones judiciales concluyentes que demuestren la persecución de los pueblos del continente africano a lo largo de las etapas de la esclavitud y el colonialismo. Argelia reafirma hoy su clara disposición a poner sus documentos históricos, pruebas materiales y testimonios documentados a disposición de los organismos africanos e internacionales pertinentes.
El responsable argelino destacó además la importancia de la reciente resolución de la ONU sobre la esclavitud transatlántica y el impulso de la Unión Africana a una agenda de reparaciones 2016-2035. Escuchemos de nuevo la declaración del presidente de la República por boca de Azouz Nasri.
Argelia acoge favorablemente la histórica resolución de las Naciones Unidas que reconoce la trata transatlántica de esclavos como uno de los crímenes más atroces cometidos contra la humanidad y la considera una manifestación concreta del creciente impulso dentro de la Unión Africana. Esta dinámica se ilustró en su histórica decisión de extender el tema del año 2025, justicia y reparaciones para los africanos y las personas de ascendencia africana, para que abarcará toda una década, o sea, desde el año 2026 hasta 2035. Argelia reafirma respecto su firme apoyo a todas las iniciativas emprendidas por la Unión Africana y sus órganos jurídicos especializados y encaminados a establecer un enfoque jurídico claro que incluya tanto la esclavitud como el colonialismo entre los crímenes más graves conocidos en la historia de la humanidad.
Siempre en su intervención, el presidente del Consejo de la Nación celebró la creación de un Día Africano de conmemoración de las víctimas de la esclavitud, el colonialismo y el apartheid y recordó la aprobación de una ley argelina que penaliza el colonialismo. Argelia siempre expresó su profunda indignación y firme condena tras el atentado terrorista perpetrado contra el aeropuerto internacional Diori Amani de Niamey, Níger. En un comunicado emitido ayer por el Ministerio Argelino de Asuntos Exteriores, Argelia reafirmó su plena solidaridad con el pueblo y el gobierno de Níger ante este atroz ataque que pretende socavar la seguridad y la estabilidad del hermano Níger. Durante una reunión celebrada ayer en la sede de las Naciones Unidas, Argelia reiteró su compromiso con la protección de los civiles y el fortalecimiento del respeto al derecho internacional humanitario. La intervención tuvo lugar en el marco de un debate dedicado a transformar los compromisos internacionales en acciones concretas para reducir el sufrimiento de las poblaciones afectadas por los conflictos. Escuchemos la declaración de la representante argelina en la sesión.
Recientes violaciones graves del derecho internacional humanitario exigen nuestra atención inmediata. Millones de civiles en zonas de conflicto siguen sufriendo la amenaza y el impacto de ataques directos. El uso del hambre como arma, la obstrucción de la ayuda humanitaria y los horrores del desplazamiento forzado también afectan a estas poblaciones. Además, enfrentan las consecuencias del colapso de los los sistemas de salud y educación. Esto subraya la necesidad urgente de reexaminar nuestro enfoque colectivo del derecho internacional humanitario. El respeto del derecho internacional humanitario es una obligación absoluta. El derecho internacional humanitario debe aplicarse de manera universal y sin selectividad. Asimismo, las partes en conflicto deben proteger las infraestructuras vitales para la supervivencia humana y permitir un acceso humanitario seguro, inmediato y sin obstáculos. Las violaciones actuales socavan directamente la capacidad de los actores humanitarios para operar de manera segura y eficaz. En este sentido, Argelia participa activamente en esta agenda, desempeñándose como copresidenta del Grupo de Trabajo sobre la Protección de la Infraestructura Civil dentro de la Iniciativa Global para fortalecer el compromiso político con el derecho internacional humanitario.
En los territorios palestinos ocupados ahora tanto en la Franja de Gaza como en Cisjordania, la tensión continúa agravándose. En el terreno, un palestino cayó en martirio anoche por disparos de las fuerzas de ocupación israelíes cerca del puente de Wadi Gaza, en el centro de la franja, mientras varias personas más resultaron heridas en ataques de artillería y bombardeos aéreos contra distintos puntos del enclave palestino. Decir también que estos nuevos ataques se producen en un contexto de continua escalada militar y deterioro de la situación humanitaria en la Franja de Gaza. Y justamente Naciones Unidas reclamó medidas urgentes para aliviar el sufrimiento de la población de Gaza. Ante el Consejo de Seguridad, el secretario general adjunto para Asuntos Humanitarios Tom Fletcher afirmó ayer que los habitantes del enclave palestino merecen recuperar su dignidad y no limitarse a sobrevivir. Escuchemos su declaración.
So it is not enough to silence the weapons. We must restore dignity.
No basta con silenciar las armas, debemos restaurar la dignidad. No podemos permitir que la cúspide de nuestra ambición y nuestra voluntad sea un mundo donde los niños tengan suficiente comida para sobrevivir y estén a salvo de bombardeos constantes de la ciudad sionista, pero sigan pasando hambre, siendo mordidos por ratas, sin hogar y sin escolarizar. Hoy los palestinos en Gaza siguen privados de lo básico que todos ustedes exigirían para sus propias familias: seguridad, vivienda, agua potable, atención médica y educación. El porcentaje de hogares que declaran acostarse con hambre se redujo del 92% al 36%. Estos frágiles avances son el mínimo indispensable de lo que los palestinos necesitan, de lo que podemos proporcionar y de lo que exige el derecho internacional.
And what international law demands.
En el sur del Líbano, la escalada militar dejó una nueva noche de violencia. Al menos 18 personas murieron y otras 33 resultaron heridos en una serie de bombardeos de las tropas sionistas contra varias localidades de la región de Nabatiyeh. Ante esta situación, el presidente libanés Joseph Aoun condenó la intensificación de los ataques israelíes y denunció que las operaciones han causado la muerte de numerosos civiles, entre ellos mujeres y niños. Y en Irán, lo hemos anunciado en nuestros titulares, las conversaciones previstas para este viernes en Suiza entre Estados Unidos e Irán, destinadas a avanzar hacia un acuerdo que contribuya a reducir las tensiones en Oriente Medio, han sido aplazadas de forma indefinida. Pese a la incertidumbre generada por el retraso de las negociaciones, el tráfico marítimo en el estrecho de Hormuz registró una fuerte recuperación. Un total de 25 buques comerciales atravesaron la vía marítima ayer, el mayor volumen desde mediados de abril pasado. La Organización Mundial de la Salud alertó este viernes de una aceleración en la transmisión del brote de Ebola en la República Democrática del Congo, a pesar del refuerzo de las medidas de respuesta sanitaria. Y en Colombia, un total de 99 integrantes de la Coordinación Nacional Ejército Bolivariano, CNEB, un grupo disidente de las antiguas FARC, entregaron simbólicamente sus armas en el departamento colombiano de Putumayo como parte de las negociaciones de paz con el gobierno del presidente Gustavo Petro. Y el Mundial 2026 sigue al rojo vivo tras una jornada llena de goles, sorpresas y resultados clave en la fase de grupos, mientras las selecciones se preparan para nuevos duelos decisivos que empiezan a perfilar el cambio hacia la clasificación. Vayamos con el resumen en compañía de Yesin Mihupi.
El Mundial 2026 sigue regalando emociones y ayer dejó varios resultados importantes en la fase de grupos. México dio un paso firme hacia la clasificación al vencer por 1-0 a Corea del Sur, mientras que Canadá protagonizó su partido con una goleada contundente al imponerse por 6-0 contra Qatar. Suiza también brilló con una victoria por 4-1 sobre Bosnia y Herzegovina, confirmando así su buen momento en el grupo B. Por su parte, República Checa y Sudáfrica empataron a 1 en un duelo muy disputado y la acción no se detuvo. Este viernes, los aficionados tendrán una jornada repleta de partidos atractivos. Estados Unidos se enfrentará a Australia en un choque clave del grupo D, mientras que Brasil buscará mostrar todo su potencial ante Haití. Otro encuentro que promete emociones es el duelo entre Escocia y Marruecos, dos selecciones que necesitan sumar para mantenerse en la pelea por los puestos de clasificación. La jornada se completará con el enfrentamiento entre Turquía y Paraguay, donde ambos equipos buscarán sus primeros puntos importantes de este Mundial 2026. En total, la fase de grupos entra en un momento decisivo y cada partido empieza a pesar. Las calculadoras todavía están guardadas, pero los equipos saben que cualquier error puede costar muy caro. El espectáculo mundialista continúa.
Pasamos ahora a una página cultural dedicada a una figura emblemática de la revolución argelina. Se trata de Ahmed Zabana. Escuchemos esta página en compañía de Kahina Mansri.
El nombre de Ahmed Zabana permanece asociado al sacrificio, la valentía y la firme determinación de un pueblo que luchaba por recuperar su libertad. Ahmed Zabana nació el 1 de noviembre de 1926 en la provincia de Máscara, al oeste de Argelia. Desde muy joven desarrolló una fuerte conciencia nacional. Su compromiso patriótico comenzó en las filas de los Scouts musulmanes argelinos, donde numerosos jóvenes adquirieron los valores de amor a la patria y defensa de la identidad nacional. Más tarde se incorporó al movimiento nacional y en 1947 ingresó en la Organización Especial, una estructura clandestina creada para preparar la lucha armada contra el colonialismo francés. Su militantismo le costó persecución, exilio y encarcelamiento. Sin embargo, todas estas experiencias no hicieron más que reforzar su convicción de que la independencia era una causa que merecía todos los sacrificios. Con el desencadenamiento de la revolución del 1 de noviembre de 1954, Ahmed Zabana desempeñó un importante papel en la organización de la lucha en la región de Máscara, participando activamente en la preparación y ejecución de acciones revolucionarias. Sin embargo, tras un enfrentamiento con las fuerzas coloniales en la cueva de Gar Bujlida, fue capturado junto a varios de sus compañeros. Posteriormente fue juzgado por un tribunal militar francés y condenado a muerte. Los historiadores consideran que aquel juicio tuvo un carácter esencialmente político, ya que las autoridades coloniales buscaban intimidar a la población argelina y frenar el avance de la revolución. Pero Ahmed Zabana se mantuvo